Welcome to our webinar on transitioning Pennsylvania and the world to 100% clean renewable energy and storage for everything. I'm Ava Sani. I'm serving as chair of the Climate Reality Project, Philadelphia and Southeastern Pennsylvania chapter. It is my pleasure to welcome each of you to our special joint meeting of the new year, 2023. We're here hosting with our Climate Reality Project, Pennsylvania Chapters Coalition. We are 5 sister chapters spanning across Pennsylvania with members located in Greater Harrisburg, Lehigh Valley, Susquehanna Valley, Pittsburgh, and Southwestern Pennsylvania, and here in Greater Philadelphia, including parts of New Jersey and Delaware. I'm so happy to see you all tonight. We're excited to also have many of our other sister chapters joining us from across the country, including New York, Northern New Jersey, Connecticut, Virginia, Florida, and California. We're also thrilled to have our friends from allied organizations with us tonight, including the Sierra Club, Physicians for Social Responsibility, Interfaith Power and Light, and many others. We'd also like to extend a very special welcome to our guest of honor, Dr. Mark C. Jacobson, who will be speaking this evening. We know that each of our organizations and many others are working to support and advocate for a just and accelerated transition to clean, renewable energy and storage for everything. We're coming together tonight to learn more about how we can envision the future in a clean energy world and what we can do to help create this. So before we get started, please note that this meeting is being recorded. We've reserved 90 minutes for this meeting's presentation and Q&A discussion, and we'll adjourn at 8:30. During the presentation, please mute your microphone. We invite you to submit your questions in the chat. We'll be collating those for the Q&A session, which will begin around 8 o'clock. So if you haven't done so already, please introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, city, state, and your Climate Reality chapter or organizational affiliation. So let's get started. I will now call on my co-host, Sandy Field, chair of the Climate Reality Project, Susquehanna Valley chapter, to please introduce our guest speaker. Sandy, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Abba. It is my great pleasure to introduce our special guest speaker this evening, Professor Mark Jacobson. Dr. Jacobson is the director of the Atmosphere and Energy Program and professor of civil and environmental engineering at Stanford University. His work focuses on better understanding air pollution and global warming problems and developing large-scale clean renewable energy solutions to them. He has published 6 textbooks and 175 peer-reviewed journal articles. Dr. Jacobson has served on an advisory committee to the U.S. Secretary of Energy and is co-founder of the Solutions Project, a nonprofit organization that focuses on a goal of 100% renewable energy for 100% of the people. As Abba mentioned, we have invited Mark to speak tonight about his work on what it will take in our homes, in our communities, and in our state to transition away from fossil fuels for energy and to using clean renewable energy with solutions that we have available right now. A deeper understanding of the practical aspects of this transition will help us to communicate this with our communities and our leaders, our legislators, as we work to help them envision a world in which we have safely avoided the climate crisis and moved to a clean energy future. I'd like to thank Mark for joining us this evening to share his knowledge and experience with us. And Mark, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Sandy and Abba, for your kind introductions. I'm just going to share my screen. So just one second. So everybody can see this. So yeah, I'm going to talk about transitioning Pennsylvania and the world, in fact, to 100% clean renewable energy and storage for all purposes. And I'm looking at this from 3 points of view. One is an air pollution point of view, a climate point of view, and an energy security point of view. Worldwide, over 7 million people die from air pollution each year, and including about 20% of these are children under the age of 5 years old. That costs the world on the order of $30 trillion per year in terms of statistical cost of life and morbidity. And this is a problem that's avoidable and is due primarily to fossil fuels and biofuel combustion. And 90% of the emissions are from energy, from air pollution deaths are from energy. And the other 10% are from, for example, biomass burning, from deforestation and wildfires and other types of air pollution. Global warming is estimated to cost the world another $30 trillion per year by 2050, and is rising and almost equivalent to air pollution in terms of its damage. But we can see the impacts of global warming today in terms of more enhanced wildfires, more severe weather, more droughts, flooding, even higher air pollution, ocean acidification, and many impacts: heat stress, heat stroke, more vector-borne diseases. These are all problems, although that's a different topic, different talk. I'm going to focus on solutions today. The third problem is that fossil fuels are limited resources. They will run out, and that will result in energy price stability, economic instability, and that will result in social and economic, social, political, and other types of instability that can result in ultimately in chaos. So that's an energy security problem. There are other types of energy security problems associated with the fact that fossil fuels often have to be mined in one country and transported into another country, and that can result in conflict. As you can see right now in Ukraine, where in Russia, the conflict between Europe and Russia in terms of energy. And there are multiple other types of energy instability problems that, again, I don't have time to get into, but I just want to mention that that's a third problem that we're trying to address here. So we're not looking at solutions that only address climate. We're looking at solutions that address climate, air pollution, and energy security simultaneously. So this is why we won't include certain technologies, and I'll discuss those in a little bit. What we do look at are solutions that eliminate pollution, climate damage, and energy insecurity. And these are wind, water, solar solutions. So I'll try to describe that here. There are four main energy sectors, and I'm talking in this talk about addressing energy problems and trying to clean up the energy system. I will mention briefly that some of these solutions apply to non-energy emissions. About 70, as I mentioned, 90% of air pollution deaths are due to energy, and about 75 to 80% of greenhouse gas emissions are due to energy, and the rest are due to biomass burning, due to agricultural emissions of methane from manure, digestive tracts of sheep and cattle, rice paddies, also nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizers, and also halogen emissions, like, for example, CFCs in the past. So we have to address those emissions as well, but I'm going to focus on energy. There are four main energy sectors. There's electricity, transportation, heating, cooling, and industry. For transportation, we would electrify that by going to battery electric vehicles and some hydrogen fuel cell vehicles for long distance heavy transport. For buildings, we'd go to electric heat pumps for air heating, air cooling, and also for water heating, and also even for dryers, such as instead of electric dryers, just plain electric dryers, we'd use electric heat pump dryers. We'd have some district heating and cooling. So the two choices are having individual heating and cooling units in buildings, or having district heating and cooling where you have centralized heaters and coolers, and then you transport the heat and cold through water pipes to buildings. And so in the US, about 7% of the US is under district heating and cooling. That could increase. So for heating and cooling, we would also, for district heating and cooling, you use some geothermal heat, centralized geothermal heat, and some solar heating for the centralized water tanks and hot and cold water tanks. We probably wouldn't use so much solar hot water heating on rooftops anymore, because it's just much more efficient and cheaper to have solar photovoltaics on rooftops instead, and heat pumps in buildings for water heating. There's no purpose of having two types of solar on your roof, solar water heating and solar photovoltaics. It just requires two sets of, you need a plumber and you need technicians to put them both in. It's better just to have solar photovoltaics and heat pumps. For industry, we would we'd electrify all high temperature processes to use electric arc furnaces, induction furnaces, resistance furnaces, dielectric heaters, electron beam heaters. In all cases, we would power the electricity for these sectors, but with wind, water, and solar. So that's onshore and offshore wind, solar photovoltaics on rooftops and in power plants, concentrated solar power, geothermal electricity, hydroelectricity, and tidal and wave electricity. And as I mentioned, we have some heat, geothermal heat and solar heat, but that would be primarily for district heating. And also, we'd for individual heat pumps in buildings, some of that would be ground source heat pump. Some of those would be ground source heat pumps, especially in very cold climates. And in that case, we'd also be using geothermal heat. So in terms of storage, well, we'll need, the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. And so we will need storage for electricity, but also heat and cold, and then for hydrogen. There are many types of electricity storage options available today. There's concentrated solar power storage, pumped hydroelectric power, existing hydroelectric dams, batteries, flywheels, compressed air storage, gravitational storage of solid masses. So these are all existing technologies. Most of them are actually pretty inexpensive. Batteries are the most expensive of these, but they're also the most convenient. So those are the ones we want to go down in cost. Batteries are typically, these days, are somewhere between $100 and $200 per kilowatt hour of storage. And those are for lithium-ion batteries. But there are some batteries types now, like iron air batteries, where the cost is projected to be 1/10 the cost of lithium-ion batteries. So we're talking about $20 per kilowatt hour of storage. And in fact, there's going to be a commercial iron air battery plant built that will be available by 2024. And if the cost is actually $20 per kilowatt hour, there's really no barrier to transitioning the whole world to 100% renewables with storage. In fact, even at $60 a kilowatt hour battery storage, there's really no barrier. So that is really good news for a solution. But right now, they're still at $100 to $200 a kilowatt hour. So batteries are being put in quite a bit, but just not yet on the massive scale that we need. We will need storage for heating and cooling as well. So there's water tank storage, ice storage, and underground heat storage in boreholes, water pits, and aquifers, and also still storage in building materials. And then there's hydrogen storage. So with regard to hydrogen, I want to talk about that a little bit. There are good and bad sources of hydrogen, and there are good and bad uses of hydrogen. So really, in our plans, the only good source of hydrogen is what we call green hydrogen, that's producing hydrogen from electricity, where the electricity comes from wind, water, and solar. We do not approve of gray hydrogen, which is hydrogen directly from natural gas, or blue hydrogen, which is hydrogen from natural gas with carbon capture, or black or brown hydrogen, which is hydrogen from coal, or pink hydrogen, which is hydrogen from nuclear electricity, or turquoise hydrogen, which is hydrogen from what's called methane pyrolysis. In terms of uses, the best applications of hydrogen are long-distance aircraft, long-distance ships, long-distance trains, long-distance trucks, and some heavy military equipment, and also ammonia and steel manufacturing, and also electricity and heat using fuel cells producing electricity and heat for remote microgrids, so that are not connected to the regular grid. But not good uses are all other vehicle transport, so passenger vehicles and pretty much anything that's not heavy duty long distance. Using hydrogen to heat buildings. Well, first of all, with passenger vehicles, it's just not very efficient. I mean, it can be clean if it's green hydrogen, but it will take 3 times the number of wind turbines as having a battery electric vehicle. For heating buildings, there's no point in using hydrogen to heat a building because we have electric heat pumps that use 1/4 the energy, and you won't need to pipe heat to buildings if you have electric heat pumps. And putting hydrogen in natural gas pipes is really risky business because the leakage rate would be about 7 times higher than natural gas leakage from pipes, and the natural gas leakage rate from pipes is already 2 to 3%. So that's really a bad idea, and we want to eliminate combustion to get rid of air pollution. So burning hydrogen is not good. especially if it's being burnt together with natural gas. Using hydrogen for for backup for the regular electricity grid is also not a great idea, because even if it were green hydrogen, you just need 2 to 2.5 times the number of wind turbines or solar panels compared with using batteries. You just have so many losses of energy, not only in the electrolyzer to produce the hydrogen, in the compressor, going into storage, and then using it in a fuel cell. There are just energy losses all along there, and the cost of all that equipment, when you combine it together, the whole thing is much more expensive than using batteries even. And we also don't want to use hydrogen for burning, to burn things. Speaking of which, well, let me just go back to this for 1 second. I'm not going to go into the details right now. Maybe somebody will ask a question, but we also do not approve of use of carbon capture for any purposes, direct air capture for any purpose, new nuclear power for any purpose, bioenergy for any purpose, and also blue hydrogen, as I mentioned, which involves carbon capture. We don't want to use carbon capture because that does not address air pollution at all. In fact, it worsens air pollution, because you don't, with carbon capture, and same with direct air capture, all you're doing is reducing CO2. You're not reducing air pollution one bit. In fact, you're increasing air pollution, because you need about 30% more energy to run carbon capture equipment. So if you have carbon capture on a coal plant, that means 30% more coal is burned to run that carbon capture equipment. That means 30% more air pollution, 30% more mining. So we don't eliminate any mining of fuels. We don't eliminate any air pollution from fuels. We don't eliminate any fossil fuel infrastructure with carbon capture. We just increase everything. And the carbon that is captured is pretty minuscule. In fact, it's advertised to, carbon capture equipment is advertised to take out 90% of the carbon from its emission source, but in reality, it's 20 to 70%. And that doesn't account for the extra energy you need to run the carbon capture equipment. When you account for that, the net savings go down even more. You don't eliminate any of the mining of the fuels, like the mining of the coal or the mining of the gas to run the carbon capture equipment. When you account for that, when everything is accounted for, you only reduce CO2 from a plant, let's say a coal plant that you've added carbon capture to, you only reduce the total CO2 emissions by anywhere from 11 to 20%. So, and then that's before you look at what happens to the carbon. Most 75% of all carbon dioxide that's captured today goes to enhanced oil recovery. That process releases 40% of the captured carbon right back to the air. So we only save 6% to like 12% of the CO2 at huge costs. The costs are enormous for this. And it's really just a tax on low-income ratepayers, because you're basically taking your coal plant, your electricity from your coal plant, you're adding $1 billion, spreading that cost to the ratepayers. The ratepayers who pay the highest fraction of their income for electricity are low-income ratepayers. So they're the ones paying for this carbon capture equipment. It's just a tax. It's a scam. We should not be approving anything with carbon capture. This applies to any form whatsoever. It's always better to eliminate emissions. It does the exact same thing as carbon capture, but it also eliminates air pollution. It eliminates fuel mining, it eliminates infrastructure, and it costs a lot less than capturing carbon. And anyway, I'll move on. So we looked at like, we have 95% of the technologies we need to transition the world to 100% wind, water, solar. The 5% we don't have right now are long distance aircraft, long distance ships, but we do know how to do that. So we did a study looking at transitioning all transport to either hydrogen fuel cell or electric, including military transport. And I just want to give you an example of what a hydrogen fuel cell aircraft might look like. That's a jumbo jet. So you can actually transition all aircraft to either battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell. Short distance, which is less than 1,500 kilometers, those could be powered entirely by batteries. Longer distance, and by the way, so these short haul flights represent about 84% of flights by number. So 84% of all the flights worldwide by number are 1,500 kilometers or less, and those can be powered by batteries. All longer distance flights, which are about 16% of flights, but they do represent about 50 or about 46% of miles traveled, those have to be something else like hydrogen fuel cell. Now, if you go to hydrogen fuel cell, it turns out that you would, to preserve the same distance take a jumbo jet, preserve the same distance, and to have the same thrust to weight ratio for takeoff, you could accomplish that with hydrogen fuel cell aircraft with a plane that's about 21% larger volume, but 22% less mass. And that's what is shown on the bottom here. It's hard, you probably can't decipher it very easily, but I'm just saying what the result is. We can actually have a jumbo jet that's hydrogen fuel cell it will be larger than the current jumbo jets by about 21%, but it'll be less mass, and it'll go the same distance, same thrust to weight ratio. In fact, we could do that for all transport that's not currently planned for electrification. So that's good news. Okay, so before I get into our plans, I just want to say some things about the storage or the, this will be first on district heating, then I'll talk about storage, then I'll talk about how you can transition individual homes. So to illustrate district heating and cooling, this is my university's district heating and cooling system. It's a 4th generation system. Actually, it was the first 4th generation system in the world. And by 4th generation, that means it included both heating and cooling. So the whole university actually is heated and cooled by the system. In 2016, up till 2016, my university had a natural gas cogeneration plant powering 80% of the campus electricity and heat. And that was bulldozed back in 2016 and replaced with this 4th generation district heating and cooling system. And there are 2 chillers here and a boiler. There are about 35 miles of hot water pipes and 35 miles of cold water pipes around the campus. And so hot water from the boiler is sent around the campus to where heating is needed, and cold water is sent to where cooling is needed. Electric heat pumps are used to raise the temperature of the heat and lower the temperature of the cold. And the electricity is obtained from, the university bought 150 megawatts of solar photovoltaics and 2 PV power plants in the deserts around here. And there's another 10 megawatts on rooftops. And so that electricity actually powers this heating and cooling system and powers the campus electricity. So actually, Stanford is also the first university in the world to be 100% renewables, not only for electricity, but also heating and cooling, and has done it with this 4th generation district heating and cooling system plus 160 megawatts of photovoltaics. So to illustrate one of the types of storage, like I said, electricity storage can be expensive with batteries, but we also need heat and cold storage, and those are actually very inexpensive, relatively. This is a town in Canada, in Okotoks, which is 1 hour south of Calgary. In 2004 and 5, there were 52 homes built with solar collectors on their garages, as you can see in the top left. And the solar collectors contain a glycol solution. During the summer, when the days are very long, heat is collected in that glycol solution and piped under this field to the right. This field had been excavated, and a lot of U-shaped pipes were installed that are just basically pipes that water flows through. And hot water from, well, first of all, the glycol solution goes first to that building where the heat is transferred to water. So then the water is piped under the field and through these U-shaped pipes where the heat is transferred to the soil. So the soil, then there's insulation around the soil. So the soil retains the heat for up to 6 months. And in the wintertime, when snow is on the ground, the heat is collected from the soil, cold water sent down in the pipes, and heat is transferred from the soil to the water. The heat is sent to the buildings, and that heat provides 100% of the wintertime heating for these 52 homes. So this is called underground borehole storage. And this costs less than $1 per kilowatt hour of storage versus for batteries, it's $100 to $200 a kilowatt hour. So this is very low cost, and the field is a play field that kids can play on, so it's very unobtrusive as well. Here's another type of district heating system or storage. This is water pit storage. So there's basically a big swimming pool on the left, and it's insulated, and water is put in the pool and then is covered with insulation. These solar collectors will collect heat primarily in the summer, send it to the pool. The water temperature gets up to 80 degrees Celsius. That heat is stored mostly until winter time, where the heat then provides heating of the water for and also the air eventually. It's for about 2,500 homes in Vojens, Denmark. So this is, again, low cost, less than $1 a kilowatt hour of storage for heating, versus $100 to $200 a kilowatt hour for battery storage. Here's another type of district. This is cooling storage. Actually, Stanford had a big ice cube under a building for starting in 1998. And so what this is during the day when electricity price, during the night when electricity price is low, the electricity is used to produce ice. And then during the day, instead of using air conditioning, which is very expensive during the day, that uses electricity, water is run through coils in the ice and then sent to buildings to cool the building. So this is really a battery storage. This replaces batteries, or replaces electricity use, because it provides air conditioning for buildings at a much lower cost. The actual storage cost here is about $30 to $40 a kilowatt hour versus replacing electricity storage or replacing electricity. So it's, again, much cheaper than a battery. All right, well, let's talk about what individuals can do in their own home to transition to 100% wind, water, and solar. So I'm going to talk about my own home, built in 2017, and there's no gas going into the property. The home itself has a steel structure. It's made of 80% recycled steel, and it's very precise, so it doesn't allow much heat loss, and it's well insulated as well. There are 13.6 kilowatts of solar photovoltaics on the rooftop. There are 4 Tesla wall mount batteries in the garage. They're first generation, so each 2 of these wall mounts is equivalent to 1 today. And then I have electric cars. I have electric heat pumps as well. So here's a ductless mini split electric heat pump, air heater, and air conditioner. So in each room, or each major room, there's one of these inside units on the left, and outside there's 2 of these outside fans. So there are about 6 inside units connected to each fan. There are no ducts, so we're not transferring heat from room to room. There are tubes that's between the inside units and the outside units that contain coolant. With heat pumps, you're not creating heat, you're just moving it around. So you're moving it from the outside to the inside. And that is much more efficient than creating heat. Heat pumps use 1/4 the energy as either natural gas heaters or electric resistance heaters, because they're just moving heat and cold around. Extremely efficient, extremely comfortable. I've had these heat pumps now for it's almost going on 6 years, and they work perfectly. Temperatures constant all year round, every year, never had a problem. Not a single thing has gone wrong with these heat pumps. And the cost has saved a huge amount of money. If you're in a very cold climate, well, this is an air source heat pump. It's extracting heat from the air outside, even when the air is very cold. But for very cold climates where you have snow on the ground, you might want to use a ground source heat pump. And there are companies that sell low-cost ground source heat pumps. In the New York area, there's Dandelion, for example. They have ground source heat pumps that cost very similar to air source heat pumps. And their ground source heat pumps are even more efficient than air source heat pumps. They use like 1/5 the energy. These air source use about 1/4 the energy as electric resistance or gas heaters. Ground source heat pumps use about 1/5 the energy because the temperature under the ground is much more constant. Now, for water heating, I use a heat pump water heater. Very simple. You just plug it into the wall and connect the pipes, and that's it. And the heat in this case is extracted from the mechanical room that the water heater sits in. The mechanical room temperature is slightly lower than outside the room. So that helped in summertime. I can just open the door and you get air conditioning for the rest of the room. But we're talking just a couple degrees. Again, uses 1/4 the energy as natural gas heater, heats the water extremely well. And I've had no problem with it, not a single maintenance problem in almost 6 years. For cooking, I used an electric induction cooktop, replaces natural gas, cooks really efficiently, boils water in half the time as natural gas. The stove does not feel hot even when you're boiling water, because you're not heating the stove, you're actually heating the pot. You need pots and pans with iron or stainless steel bases, but those are just the same cost as any other pot or pan. Very easy to run. I show this unit on the left, which is an individual burner. That costs like $50 and even could be down to $30. I mention that because in developing countries where, like on the order of 2.5 to 3 million people die every year from air pollution, from indoor air pollution, that's due to indoor burning of biomass and coal for home heating and cooking. These individual burners can replace burning biomass and coal for cooking. And all you need now is an electricity source, such as a solar panel or two, a community solar panel or two, because people don't cook a lot compared to heating, for example. And so it does not take a lot of electricity, but this is a clear path forward to eliminating a lot of air pollution in developing countries, is using electric induction cooktops. Okay, so this is from 5 years of electricity use. I generated 120% of all my home and vehicle energy. I had no electric bill, no natural gas bill, or gasoline bill for those 5 years. In fact, the extra 20% of electricity I generated, I sold back to my community choice aggregation, CCA utility, Silicon Valley Clean Energy. They actually purchased the electricity I produce at the same rate that I would have had paid for that electricity at that time of the day. So I got paid an average of $860 a year for 5 years for the extra electricity, and also had no bills whatsoever for those 5 years. I also avoided a $6,000 gas hookup fee, because my underlying utility PG&E would have charged me $6,000 to hook up the gas to the property. I avoided that. I avoided about $10,000 in gas pipes. And these are kind of average, a range of prices people would pay for these different things. I avoided an electric bill, gas bill, and gasoline bill. So I saved in my case, I saved on the order of $16,000 up front, plus another like $6,000, $7,000 per year in bills. And so the payback time was 5 years. I've already paid back the system, the solar and the batteries, and the solar is warranted for 25 years. So I basically have 20 years free electricity, free energy. It's really a no-brainer. Any new home should be completely renewable. There's no purpose of having two forms of energy in your home, gas and electricity. You're just paying for the extra utility. You're paying for the extra hookups. You're paying for the extra equipment. And it's just completely not necessary. Electricity can do everything better than gas. We really need to stop having gas in new homes. Existing homes, we also want to retrofit those, get rid of the gas, electrify everything. Of course, this will take time, but we need to do this for 100% renewable future. This shows what happened on the hottest day of the year in 2020. Outside temperature, 106 degrees. Inside temperature, I kept it nice, 77 degrees. Even on that day, so this shows the electricity use and production and consumption. The green is the solar production on that day. I produced almost 60 kilowatt hours of electricity. I consumed 45 kilowatt hours. So even on the hottest day of the year, I produced an extra 15 kilowatt hours of electricity that I sent to the grid to help avoid blackouts on the grid. And the blue here during the day is consumption of electricity from the solar directly. The blue after the sun goes down is the batteries kicking in. The red is after the batteries have been exhausted and I'm using some grid electricity. But as I mentioned, over the year, I'm producing 20% more than I'm consuming. So if everybody had the heat pump system, because the heat pumps are so efficient, they hardly use any energy. This is why I'm able to produce more than I consume on the hottest day of the year. Because of this efficiency, I mean, if everybody had heat pumps in their buildings, we would not have blackouts in California or Texas or any other state. They're just so efficient, they hardly use any energy. Now, you might ask, well, what happens if right after sunset, and because you have a lot of solar during the day, but what happens after sunset? I mean, where are we going to get that electricity if we go to 100% wind, water, solar? Well, in California, it's pretty straightforward. California's electricity demand in summer is actually twice that in any other season, and it's mostly due to air conditioning in the afternoons. But coincidentally, this shows offshore wind resources in California in each of the 4 seasons. You can see that in summer, the offshore wind resources where it shows July there is much higher than in any other season. In addition, offshore wind peaks after the sun goes down. And so that's the obvious solution for California. Build a lot of offshore wind, combine that with solar, and then we'll have batteries, hydroelectric for backup. And that's how we get 100% renewables all day, every year. Okay, so let's move to talk about, can we apply these principles to transition the entire world to 100% wind, water, and solar for all purposes? So we did plans for 145 countries and all 50 US states. And let me summarize the country plans, and I'll intermingle some results for Pennsylvania as well. So if we sum up the end-use energy among 145 countries, in 2018, the end-use power demand in all those countries was 13.1 trillion watts, or terawatts. That would go up to 20.4 terawatts by 2050 if we don't do anything. That's business as usual. But if we electrify and provide the electricity with wind, water, solar, something interesting happens. Our energy demand, end-use energy demand, goes down 56%. That's because battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are much more efficient than internal combustion vehicles. We reduce power demand on average over all sectors by 20.5% by going to battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Individual battery vehicles are 75% more efficient than internal combustion engine vehicles. But when we're averaging all sectors, that's why the reduction is only 20.5%. Electrifying industry, another 4%. Using heat pumps instead of natural gas heaters or any other type of heater, 13.6%. Eliminating fuel mining. By going to wind, water, solar, we eliminate the need to mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels and uranium. That takes up 11.3% of all energy worldwide. We get rid of that. 6.6% efficiency improvements beyond business as usual. We add that to the rest, and we get 56% reduction of demand without changing our habits. So if with 56% less energy requirements, even if the cost per unit energy were the same with wind, water, solar as fossil fuels, we're paying each year 56% less. It's just amazing reduction of cost just due to the efficiency of a wind, water, solar electric system. Well, let's look next at the timeline. So if this shows pretty much the same information, but over time. So if we go forward and don't do anything, we follow the top line to 2050, we have 20.4 terawatts of demand, trillion watts of demand worldwide. But if we electrify and provide the electricity with wind, water, solar, we go down those 5 shades of colors down to the 100% WWS line of 8.9 terawatts. And we provide that wind, water, solar with onshore and offshore wind, solar PV, and concentrated solar, and solar heat, some rooftop PV, geothermal heat and electricity, and hydroelectric power. This timeline shows an 80% transition by 2030 and 100% by 2050. We need 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2050 to avoid 1.5 degrees global warming, and also to eliminate as fast as possible air pollution, health problems, and also energy insecurity problems. But if we can eliminate 80% by 2030, really there's no reason we can't eliminate 100% by 2035. That's what this diagram shows, a timeline that has 100% transition by 2035 with 80% by 2030, the same endpoint at 2050 as the last diagram. So we think this is what we need, and we also think this is possible to transition. As I mentioned, we have 95% of the technologies we need to transition. So what is the mix worldwide that we would of wind, water, solar after we transition, electrify everything? Well, we did plans for each of 145 countries, and this shows the average mix over all these 145 countries. These countries represent 99.7% of all world emissions. So worldwide, it would be about 32% onshore wind, 13% offshore wind, 16% roof PV, 30% utility PV, 3% concentrated solar power, 1% geothermal, 5% hydro. And all that hydro exists, by the way. We're not adding any new hydro. And then small amounts of tidal and wave, geothermal, and solar heat. And you can see what we have there for the US as well. RFC is the grid region that Pennsylvania lies in. And so it's a portion of the US. There are several major grid regions, and Reliability First Corporation is the grid region that Pennsylvania is in. And so that region, we get about 21% onshore wind, 14% offshore wind, 15% rooftop PV, 49% utility PV, and then small amounts of everything else in this analysis. So you might ask, well, how much land does this all take? Well, not very much actually, because this for new installations, we do not need new land for offshore wind, for tidal or wave power. We're not adding any new hydro. Rooftop PV does not add any new land. We do not use much geothermal. So it's all the land is in utility PV and CSP for what we call footprint on the ground, and then onshore wind spacing, which is spacing between wind turbines, because wind turbines themselves hardly take up any land. It's just the space between wind turbines that take up land. So worldwide, the total the average over all 145 countries is 0.53% of world land. So that's 0.36% for the onshore wind spacing and 0.17% for the utility PV plus CSP footprint. Of course, a lot of the utility PV can actually go on the spacing area of onshore wind. So the 0.53% is the upper limit, and most of that space is actually open space that can be used for dual purposes. For the US, we'd use 0.84%. For the RFC, it's actually higher, more intense land use. But if we don't have enough land for the RFC region, we can go more offshore and more rooftop PV. Those are ways to avoid use of land, either like switch onshore to offshore wind, or more switch from PV, from utility PV to rooftop PV, and that doesn't take up any new land. But for comparison, take the US number of 0.84%. That's less than the land occupied by the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry occupies 1.3% of all US land area. And that's due to the 1.3 million active oil and gas wells, 3.2 million abandoned oil and gas wells, the millions of miles of pipelines for gas and oil, the coal mines, the refining facilities, the hundreds of thousands of gas stations, these natural gas storage facilities, you name it. There's a lot of land, 1.3% of the land area. And there are 50,000 new oil and gas wells drilled every year in North America. And so this needs to go on and on and on. So the land requirements for oil and gas and other fossil fuels is increasing each year. With wind, water, solar, we have an initial build out, but then the increases after that are much smaller because we eliminate the need to continuously mine and refine fossil fuels and also uranium. Can we keep the grid stable? Yes, we think so, because, well, we've done grid analyses, not only for all 145 countries, we broke them up into 24 world regions, but also for all the 50 US states. We broke up the states into each grid region that exists right now. We also looked at individual states like California and Texas. Can we actually keep the grid stable every second of every day? Well, so here are results for the RFC grid region. This is a 2-year simulation. Every 30 seconds we have results for. And so we did meteorological modeling to predict the winds and solar radiation fields every 30 seconds for 2 years throughout the US. And we compared the production of electricity from wind, water, solar with the demand for electricity. This is after electrifying everything, and also combine that with storage and using demand response to keep the grid stable. We find that we can keep the grid stable everywhere in the world, including in Pennsylvania, with 100% wind, water, solar, with zero downtime whatsoever. It's really an optimization problem. It's not rocket science. So you might ask, well, what's the cost of keeping the grid stable? Well, first of all, the capital cost worldwide is about $62 trillion. This is the cost of a worldwide Green New Deal. The US cost is about $9 trillion, and Pennsylvania is about $440 billion. That's for all energy sectors, electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry, to go 100% wind, water, solar with zero gas, zero fossil fuels at all, zero nuclear, zero biofuels. And you can see the cost per kilowatt hour. But what's relevant is really how much is being paid each year. This is the relevant, and this is what we can compare with business as usual, the best. So worldwide, right now, the world pays about $11 trillion per year for energy. That's expected to go up to about $18 trillion per year by 2050. Health costs based on 7 million deaths per year is about $34 trillion per year. Climate costs about $32 trillion per year in 2050. Total social cost, 83 trillion. Go to wind, water, solar, we eliminate the health costs, we eliminate the climate costs from energy. Our energy costs go down 63%. That's because we have a 56% lower cost, lower amount of energy used, and another 15% reduction in the cost per unit energy. So we go from 17.8 trillion per year to 6.6 trillion per year for the energy cost, 63% lower energy costs, 92% of the lower social costs, which is the energy, health, and climate costs. This is really an enormous benefit of transitioning. Pennsylvania, same thing, 58% lower energy costs, 85% lower social costs going to wind, water, solar. It's a no-brainer. Okay, so last section of this talk is policies. Where are we and what do we need to do? And what is being done? So Mark DeLuca and I developed our first energy plan. And this was a worldwide plan, but not for individual countries, to transition. And the question we were trying to answer at the time in 2009 was, is it possible to transition the world to 100% wind, water, and solar for all purposes? And the answer was, well, yes, it's technically and economically possible to transition by 2030, but for social and political reasons, a complete transition may not occur until 2050, but hopefully we'll get 80% by 2030. Little did we know that this paper would be the scientific basis for the Green New Deal that was proposed in legislation back in 2018, although the Green New Deal legislation has never been voted on at the US level. However, there have been 8 proposed laws in Congress, in the US Congress, to go to 100% renewable, but none of it has been voted on. However, there are 62 countries that are committed to 100% renewables. They do have laws or policies for 100% renewable electricity. There's only one country that is committed to 100% renewables, all energy sectors, that's Denmark. I should point out, though, that China's emissions alone are equivalent to the emissions of 120 countries. So, and there are 200 countries in the world. There are 10 countries. So China's emissions are close to a third of all energy consumed worldwide. There are 10 countries whose the sum of emissions are another third, and the rest are all the other 190 countries. So 62 countries committed to 100% renewables actually does not represent a huge amount of total energy, but it shows a commitment by these countries, and every commitment is important. There are 16 countries and states, US states, that are near or above 100% annual electricity generated or consumed from wind, water, solar. So on the left are the countries that generate 100% of their electricity that they produce with wind, water, solar. So Iceland, Norway, Costa Rica, Paraguay, Albania, Bhutan, Nepal, Ethiopia, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, they all produce 98.5 to 100% of their generated electricity with wind, water, solar. All of those cases, though, hydropower is the number one wind, water, solar electricity generating source. Iceland also has geothermal, Norway, Costa Rica also wind, Ethiopia also wind. Well, in addition, there are Kenya, Tajikistan, and Namibia. They are generating, more than 91% of their electricity with wind, water, solar. Kenya is geothermal, so that's the other oddball. There are 3 states, South Dakota, Washington State, and Montana, that actually generate. South Dakota generates 120% of its electricity with wind, water, solar. So it's actually 77% wind and the rest hydro. They actually also generate fossil fuels, so that they're actually generating 200% of all their electricity, and they're exporting the difference. But the point is, more than 100% of South Dakota's electricity that's generated, that is consumed, is produced with wind, water, solar. Washington State is 97%. Montana is like 92%. Scotland is around 91, 92% of its consumed energy is also wind, water, solar, primarily from wind. In the US, there are 18 states and territories that have laws or executive orders to go to 100% renewables. Rhode Island, actually, I should correct that, Rhode Island's by 2033. Washington, D.C. by 2032, Connecticut and Oregon by 2040. And then the rest are either 2045, 2050. And so there is a lot of progress going to 100% renewables in terms of electricity policy, but not with transportation and buildings and industry. In addition, there are 180 cities in the US that are committed to 100% renewables. The blue ones are big cities, and the ones in red or smaller ones. You can see Philadelphia is in there as well. And there are other Pennsylvania cities that are not on this particular list here, but they're in the 180 cities. There are over 380 international companies, including 8 of the 10 biggest companies in the world, that have committed to 100% renewables. Both Google and Apple have actually reached 100% renewables in their global operations. So that's all good news. These companies are really pushing forward, are actually building wind farms, solar farms, battery storage facilities, and actually helping a transition move along. Okay, so let me summarize just briefly. I didn't talk about jobs, but I will say now that worldwide, our plans show that we can create about 28 million more long-term full-time jobs than lost. In the US, it's about 3 to 4 million more. We'd require only about 0.53% of the world's land for footprint and spacing. If we transition, we'd avoid 7 million air pollution deaths per year, slow then reverse global warming. We think we can keep the grid stable throughout the world with 100%. The absolute energy costs are 63% lower with wind, water, solar. Energy, health, and climate costs are 92% lower. It's a no-brainer in my mind. I want to just point out, and just in case you want more information, there's a new book, a new layman's book coming out that I've written that's coming out actually in a couple of weeks. It's called No Miracles Needed. And there's a more detailed book that's already available on that, but it's used for a course. There are 100% renewable energy plans are available. They're publicly available. Anybody can access them. And there actually is a infographic map, so you can access, you can click on a state or a country to find the plan. That's the second link. There's actually, I've been teaching a course called 100% Clean Renewable Energy and Storage for Everything at Stanford. And Stanford's actually taken that course and taken 12 hours out of it. And they've made a new online course that's also will be available in the next week or two, if anybody's interested. There are also other energy courses at Stanford people might be interested in taking that are online, and they're pretty low cost too. And then there, as I mentioned, infographic maps where you can find roadmaps for each of the energy plans for Pennsylvania and other states and countries. So anyway, I'll try to answer any questions you might have. So thank you very much. And I've sent these slides to Sandy. So if anybody wants these slides, you can certainly, you're welcome to have access to them as well. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mark. We can see we have a lot of renewable energy solutions that can protect our world from dangerous global warming and climate change impacts. We look forward to your participation in the Q&A session, which we will start now. We'll begin with questions that we received from the RSVP form, and then we'll share questions from the chat. So okay. Sandy, could you please start us off with the questions?
Okay, great. So there were a lot of questions that came in from people as part of the RSVP form, and I kind of took them and put them into buckets and tried to make them a little bit more brief and just kind of condense them. So if you don't hear your exact question, I apologize, but I was able to bring, we had a lot of similar topics. So one of the categories of question was kind of on the role of the fossil fuel industry in the transition to clean energy. So have you seen any signs that the fossil fuel industry can play a meaningful role in the transition to renewable energy?
Well, in order to manufacture the wind, water, solar equipment, we're going to have to use existing plants. And so of course, and also energy from existing fossil fuel sources. As we get closer to 100%, we'll basically be replacing those fossil fuel sources with wind, water, solar, so it'll eventually go away. But in the meantime, yeah, we need the existing energy infrastructure to provide power to build the wind, water, solar infrastructure. There are also, people who are working in fossil fuel jobs will have an opportunity to transition. So like offshore oil drilling can easily transition into offshore wind farm development. In fact, that's happening already. And so job transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables will be important. But we do not need new fossil fuel sources in the meantime. So if the question is, are we going to use existing fossil fuel sources? Yes, but that is not a reason to promote new fossil fuel sources, new gas drilling, new oil drilling. We don't want that at all. We want the opposite. We need to accelerate as fast as possible. 80% by transition by 2030. That's 7 years away. That's on the order of 11% per year.
So I think some of the questions were kind of focused on whether the fossil fuel industry has expertise that can be used for the transition, and also whether we can recycle the materials that they're using. And I think you kind of touched on that, but people were thinking more about the actual, the metals and things like that they use, the drills and stuff. Is that any of that going to be able to be recycled?
Well, certainly the expertise on drilling. I mean, in terms of like for offshore wind, as I mentioned, it's a good example. But I think, I don't know about the actual equipment. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of assets that won't be needed anymore. But certainly the locations like transmission lines will be very important. So like if you have a coal plant or a natural gas plant and we replace that with a wind farm or solar farm, or a battery facility, we can still use those transmission lines. So that's probably the most valuable assets, the transmission that goes to these places, to the coal and gas plants, and nuclear facilities as well. And there could be I know that like there's transitioning for building offshore wind that requires restructuring or using docks that are right now maybe used for natural gas shipping and things like that. So some recycling of fossil fuel assets can happen, but I'm not sure what percent though.
Great, thank you. Another group of questions were sort of around how we can convince our leaders that false solutions like carbon capture and blue hydrogen that just continue the natural gas industry in Pennsylvania in particular. How do we convince our leaders that these are a huge waste of time and money, in light of the fact that Pennsylvania is right now, we're bidding for $1 billion for a blue hydrogen hub, and we could totally use $1 billion for other things. And so just what is the argument that could you have any talking points that we can use?
Yeah, well, that's a very good example of how it's really an opportunity cost when we waste money on things that don't work, that don't have any benefit except to keep the fossil fuel industry alive. That's an opportunity cost. And well, so the first thing is we need to educate the policymakers about the fact that there is no benefit to carbon capture. There's no benefit to blue hydrogen. It's much more efficient to go to green hydrogen, and it's much cleaner. It's safer for our children. I think the strongest argument against carbon capture that most people are unaware of is just the fact that it increases air pollution. And whereas if we use that money to replace fossil fuels instead of to keep them and adding carbon capture, we're eliminating air pollution from those fossil fuels. So carbon capture of any kind increases air pollution, it increases fuel mining, it increases fossil fuel infrastructure, and hardly reduces CO2. So that's what I would just keep drilling, so to speak, to the policymakers. You're increasing air pollution, you're increasing mining, you're increasing fossil infrastructure, you're hardly reducing carbon. It's much better to use that money to replace the fossil plant. You'll eliminate air pollution, you'll eliminate mining, you'll eliminate the infrastructure, and you'll eliminate far more carbon dioxide at lower costs. So that's, I think, the soundbite I would tell them.
Great, thank you. We had some questions around the environmental impact of the materials needed for the renewable energy transition. And do you think that these arguments have any merit in light of the current business as usual environmental impacts? So things that my legislator says to me are things about, mining for batteries and for wind, recycling of wind turbines and things like that. Is any of that, do you find any merit in those arguments?
No, well, no, I don't. Like, we eliminate all fossil fuel mining, and we eliminate mining for fuels in general. Like with wind, water, solar, the wind comes right to the turbine, solar comes right to the panel. And the amount of mining that's eliminated is orders of magnitude larger than the amount of mining needed for batteries and other things. In fact, if you look, in fact, the numbers are available. It's less than we'd be using less than 0.1% of the annual mining mass than we're currently using. So we're talking trivial numbers, trivial amounts of mining. And even, first of all batteries are going to be recycled, and companies are already recycling their batteries 100%. Sonnen is a battery company. They recycle 100% of their batteries. Redwood Materials, they recycle batteries and other types of energy stuff. 97% of the materials recycled. With regard to lithium, I mean, we can get a lot of our lithium from the Salton Sea alone. 40% of the world's lithium can be obtained from the Salton Sea. There, no new mining is needed because we already mine the brine that contains the lithium for geothermal electricity production. And you can just extract the lithium from the brine without any new mining at all. So between recycling, using brines to extract lithium, and also mining operations will be 100% renewable when we have wind, water, solar. So they'll be clean as well. So that'll reduce their impacts as well. So, but the bottom line is we're using less than 0.1% of the annual material mining that we currently do with wind, water, solar.
I'm going to have to go back and watch this recording and write down all these numbers that you're giving us. So when I have conversations with my legislators, I can have these at hand. It's super important. So one of the things that we don't have in Pennsylvania is community solar. Can you talk about how we can push our legislators to move toward that? That would be something that would really help people people who rent and things like that to get access to solar power.
Yeah, well, it's really important to expand solar not only on rooftops but in utility scale. I mean, if we electrify everything, which is what we're planning to do, and countries are going in that direction, even though our end use power demand goes down 60%. So if we start with 100 units of energy today that we need for all purposes, that's going to go down to 40 units because we eliminate 60% of our energy requirements. But right now, electricity is 20% of all the end use energy. So electricity is 20 units of our 100 units of energy. If we go to wind, water, solar, we're going to double our electricity use. So all 40 units almost that we're going to have are going to be electricity. So we'll need more sources of electricity, but we'll be using less of all energy. So utilities are trying to dissuade people from putting rooftop solar on. They're trying to do it in Florida and California. So it's really the utilities are trying to slow down rooftop solar adoption. But we need to point out, because they're afraid that people putting solar on their own rooftops, that's going to take away the energy that the utility needs to provide to people, so they'll have less income, the utilities. But we need to point out to policymakers that utilities will have, our demand for electricity is going to be double. And so even if 40% or 30 or 40% of all the electricity is from rooftop solar, utilities are still going to have more business than they have today. So they shouldn't be afraid to put rooftop solar on. And so I think that's the first thing, is that utilities should not be afraid for people to put rooftop solar. We're going to have way more electricity demand than they're going to be able to provide, or that easily. So having more rooftop solar will be beneficial. And people will want to power their own power to reduce the chance of blackouts. If there is a blackout, you can power your own electricity. In the last 5.5 years, we've had several blackouts in California, but I've never had a blackout in my house because I have my batteries that provide my own electricity when the grid goes down. And that's what everybody should have. So there should be laws encouraging people to be more resilient, especially when there's, some kind of emergency, some kind of storm, all the power goes out. You want to be able to have people in need want to have their own power. So this should be a priority. to allow people to put solar and batteries in their own homes. It's only to everybody, the society's benefit. They can also provide extra electricity to the grid to help avoid blackouts, as I talked about, because of the efficiency. If going to heat pumps and all these other efficient devices, it really helps to keep the grid stable. So it's really to everybody's benefit to transition to rooftop solar and transition all the buildings to electric and heat pumps.
So one of the other questions in the chat during your talk was, how long do those Tesla batteries last, power your house if the power goes out? Is it just a couple of hours for essential things, or is it a day?
Well, it can vary. I mean, the batteries are, if it depends if you're running them on a full load or just some loads. So if you just run them on for critical loads like lights and refrigerator, a couple other minor things, I mean, you can last 2 weeks easily. I mean, if you want to power, you can't put, if you want to power your electric car, that's a different story. It might last, an hour or two, but lights don't, LED lights, they use, 8 watts or something, which is, so it's like, it's trivial. It's like very, but you can power like a lot of lights. You can power 100 lights for, or not, I don't know about 100, I haven't done the calculation of it, but it's like I can run 2 weeks easily with those batteries with just critical loads. And you could set it up so you're just running critical loads. If you put more loads, then it's going to be less time. So things that are, definitely if it's freezing outside, you'll want to run your heat pumps. So that might be, cut it down to 3 days with a couple batteries.
But that's similar to what a generator runs that people have now that they put gas into.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You can definitely. I mean, because everything's so efficient. I mean, we're talking. It's just things can last long, but you'll have to calculate and do it. Optimize to make it last the longest.
Yeah, you really start to think about all your energy uses.
Right.
So another category that was in the RSVPs was kind of the economics of the clean energy transition. So some people were asking about, so as money comes in from, say, like the Inflation Reduction Act and things like that to our state, what are the things that we should be advocating for first in terms of the transition, besides saying stop giving all the money to fossil fuel guys? What are the things that we want to say? Do we say put the money into the grid, put the money into solar, into wind, and maybe kind of thinking about Pennsylvania? I know there's people from other places on the call, but most of us are Pennsylvania.
Well, first, I think people want to be positive, so it's always good to set a policy. Let's go to 100% renewables, not only in each sector, so electricity and transportation, buildings and industry. So we want to set policies in each one. Then what are the low-hanging fruit? Well, buildings, it's heat pumps and induction cooktop stoves. For transportations, it's electric vehicles. For electricity, it's wind and solar and batteries. So those are the things you want to focus on. I mean, especially the heat pumps, the electric vehicles, those are just really efficient compared to current state. And then we also need to address industry, so electrifying each industrial process. So, I mean, you can do each home. There are only a few things that need to be changed in individuals' homes to go to 100% wind, water, solar. Just get rid of each of the gas appliances and replace them with electric ones, and then provide a source of the electricity. Well, it could be the grid, or it could be your own solar, for example, and batteries. So I would focus on things that are simple, one thing in each sector, 1 or 2 things in each sector. Focus on those to put the money into.
Yeah, we have people in Pennsylvania who heat with coal still. Oh,
yeah, that's bad.
It is bad. I guess this is kind of along the same lines of what you were saying about helping people to shift from gas to electric. But how will this transition affect the family energy costs? So I mean, it's one thing for people who are well off to get solar panels and things like that, but it's very difficult for some families to do the transition. And then maybe that's one place where we are able to put some of that money into helping that transition. But how, in general, our energy price is going to go down for most people in this transition?
Yeah, they definitely should, because we're eliminating the need to mine for fuels, and that's where a lot of the cost is. But one thing that really helps, especially for low income, is having a community choice aggregation utility. So there are 7 states that allow community choice aggregation utilities now, and there are others, I think, that they can do it. So these utilities can offer 100% renewable electricity at the same cost as the fossil fuel electricity. So like if you're in an apartment, you can't put solar on your own roof. If you have the option for your electricity bill to pay for 100% renewable electricity instead of fossil fuel electricity at the same cost, why shouldn't you be able to do that? I mean, you can do that in 7 states in the US, but they're not available in a lot of other states. So pushing for community choice aggregation utilities, I think, is a very positive step in helping everybody transition, because then you don't even have to buy your own solar panels to get 100% renewables.
Yeah, that's a great point. We have some of that in Pennsylvania, and not in my particular town. So then going on to questions from the chat. So you may be familiar with the fact that our PJM electric grid is on a 2-year hold on all new solar energy projects. Do we have any hope of pushing them off that hold?
I think, wasn't that because they have a backlog or something?
They have a huge backlog. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like we need to throw some people at it, get people working on that.
Yeah, well, so it sounds like they do have some solar projects lined up. It's just that they're not accepting new projects. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think they have hundreds of solar projects in the queue.
Right.
So
Yeah, I mean, it definitely needs to speed up. I mean, we just don't have time to waste on trying. And I mean, yeah, they probably just need more people to throw at it.
yeah. Somebody asked if heat pumps work with homes that have radiators, like forced water, I guess, through the radiators. Can a heat pump heat that water?
Yeah, well, yeah, you can. I mean, if the source of the heat, you can create from the heat pump. I don't know what the source of so the water itself is being heated in the radiator by some mechanism, maybe gas. So you'd replace that with the water being heated from a heat pump.
Yeah, I think there's a boiler of some sort.
Yeah, so you'd replace that boiler with the heat pump water heater. So the water would go through the hot water would come from the heat pump instead of from the boiler.
Okay, I see. Are there environmental justice issues associated with any of the solutions that you've talked about?
Well, I think all of the solutions benefit low-income communities the most, because a lot of these communities are located near pollution sources. And so we're eliminating the pollution from those sources. So that would have a big impact. Ideally, we'd create jobs so there should be some special consideration for low-income communities to get jobs that will come around, because these will create more jobs than lost. I think, yeah, I think it's all positive. I mean, in terms of environmental justice, it's just really, we want, a lot of people who die from air pollution are people who can't afford to get away from it. And that's the biggest benefit. And also there's going to be a climate benefit that'll be slower, but there's also this economic benefit. I mean, we're paying less for energy because we're using less energy. It's much more efficient. When we use less energy, we don't need to pay for the extra amount of energy we're not using.
Right. So long as we're making sure we cite these various new energy sources in not in environmental justice communities as we've done in the past. I mean, and perhaps in some ways they're beneficial to be cited in those communities if they bring jobs.
Yeah, I mean, these are not, that's the thing, these are not toxic energy sources or storage. I mean, yeah, we're not, yeah, that's the nice thing about wind, water, and solar. It's very,
Right.
very clean and non-toxic.
We could just replace the existing bad things and put in non-polluting ones.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, they're like old nuclear power plant lands are being covered with solar panels now. And, so that's because you have this let's say you take an old nuclear plant that you can't use the land for 70 years, nobody can live there because it's been contaminated, but you can put solar panels on it, on the land to generate electricity. It's one use of bad land. Same thing with mountaintop removal coal. Putting solar panels on that land is the best thing you can do rather than just leave it, leave us despoiled environment.
Yes. So we had another question about policy. Can you talk a little bit about policies that you've heard about that are in place to hinder the transition?
Yeah, well, I think certainly policies that favor fossil fuels, but also policies that favor carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen, small modular nuclear reactors, bioenergy. These are all policies that are hindering the transition to clean renewable energy. I mean, when we're putting money into things that don't exist and have little hope of helping solve the problem, you're taking that money away from actual real solutions. And that's going to slow the transition.
Great. And then this last question that I wrote down from the chat. What about the shortfall in electric transmission capability? I think that you've addressed this. That is there going to be a shortfall in electric transmission capability?
Well, I mean, we can there's a trade-off between transmission and storage. So ideally, we'd have a good mix of transmission and storage, but it's hard to build new transmission. So that could be something that slows down a transition. However, the good news is if you don't have transmission, one way to alleviate that problem is to just build more storage. And the cost of storage is coming down quite a bit and rapidly, and it's also much easier to implement storage. So I don't think that's a real problem. And also a lot of our energy is going to come, for example, from offshore wind, where it's just getting started now, and that doesn't require a lot of transmission. So, and same thing with a lot of solar can be local, so we don't need a lot of transmission for that. It would help to have some certain transmission lines put up in certain places, but that could be slow to develop.
Yeah, so in Pennsylvania, in the PJM grid, much of our storage is already pumped hydro, and there's no reason whatsoever that can't be pumped by electricity from renewable sources, right?
Correct. Well, and also there's potential to have a lot of battery storage in Pennsylvania too, and you don't need to build a lot more pumped hydro. But pumped hydro is, I mean, the storage, usually when you have extra wind or solar, then you pump the water up a hill. When you need it, you pump the water, you let the water drain down the hill. So it works really well with wind, water, solar.
Yeah. I mean, I think the fact that I was surprised to find that that's what we mostly use for storage in Pennsylvania. So, and I mean, PJM is already talking about how flexible and how responsive battery storage is, and how it'll actually be easier than firing up a coal plant and things like that in the future, the way they do now if we have a peak use.
Batteries are much better than natural gas for storage backup. I mean, batteries respond instantaneously within a millisecond, even natural gas, it takes you 5 minutes to ramp that up. So it's not, I mean, natural gas is what we use mostly now, but batteries are just even much more efficient than gas for backup.
Yeah. So I've come to the end of my questions, Alan. I think we've come to the end of our time. Mark, I just want to say, really appreciate your talk today. It's given me so much useful information for countering the arguments that we hear every day in Pennsylvania from people who are, have been bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry, frankly. This is, I mean, it's all uphill in Pennsylvania is what I say. And, we really need these pieces of information to help us to turn the tide toward clean energy and make the economic argument that, this is what we need to do here and we can do it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your inviting me, and this is really good questions, and hopefully I was understandable and got some information across. So yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
Yes, definitely. This was a absolutely wonderful evening. And I would like to thank everyone from our sister chapters and allied organizations for your contributions to our excellent discussions this evening. I did see that there were a few additional questions in the chat, and hopefully we can address those after the meeting here. So a big thanks to my co-host this evening, Sandy Fields, chair of the Susquehanna Valley PA chapter. She initially reached out to Mark and invited him to present his work to our chapter members and fellow climate reality leaders and environmental advocates. So a big thank you to her. I'd also like to thank the chairs for our Pennsylvania Chapters Coalition for their support in planning this special joint meeting. And finally, definitely, Mark, I'd like to especially thank you, our honored guest speaker, for joining us this evening to share your outstanding work, experiences, and advice. Thank you, Mark, for your guidance and insights on transitioning Pennsylvania and the world to 100% clean renewable energy and storage. We really believe that you've set the tone for our approach to climate action in 2023 by helping us to envision how to create a realistic and sustainable future that leads to a clean energy world. We're grateful for all of your foundational work that has supported the 100% clean renewable energy movement across our country and around the world. So a big thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Abby.
Thank you. All right, so for our next steps, everyone will follow up after the meeting by sending registrants the link to the recording. And we'll also post those on our chapter's website, the Philadelphia and Southeastern Pennsylvania chapter. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our special webinar event. We look forward to working with you to accelerate the transition to clean renewable energy future. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Thank you.